Guys, did you guys learn a little bit on Lex and what is that, Poly and all of those things? Do you guys think that you can build a new Alexa or what? Yourself, maybe? No? Okay. Were you guys here yesterday? Some of you guys? Did you guys do the new service forecast and all of those things? No? It was mostly presentation. Oh, because it's in preview, right? You guys haven't signed up for it. Right. Well, today, I'm going to talk to you guys about ground truth. Do you guys know what ground truth is? Yeah? Some of you guys, I see some guys nodding your heads. Now, do you guys know what data labeling is? Labeling data, data sets. Have any of you guys labeled data before? Raise your hand real quick. I feel bad for you guys. So you guys know that, some of you guys don't know, so data labeling in data science is basically in a supervised machine learning type of use cases where you have to label the data first before you can actually train the machine to actually do the labeling for you, right, to do the inference. So you label the data. So for example, in the lab later today, you guys are going to be the labeler yourself. You're going to experience how tedious but how important that job is, okay? So in the lab later, you're gonna be labeling an image classification problem, okay? So you're gonna label whether it's a cat, whether it's a dog, this and that, okay? So very important in data science, very tedious. A lot of times, I have customers come to me and they say, okay, I have all of this data, I'm ready to mine this data. Let's just put it into SageMaker or something and then just see what we can get. Well, a lot of times we come back and say, is your data actually labeled, right? Because without labeled data, it's just going to be garbage in and garbage out, right? You guys heard of garbage in, garbage out, right? So if your data is not good enough, the machine is going to see garbage, right? So it's going to spit out garbage. It's not going to be something that's useful to you at all. So ground truth, we introduced the ground truth in re:Invent last year. To solve the problem where these customers that have a lot of data, but not a whole lot of data that are labeled, and they need a lot of people trying to label this data. So we announced this service to help you guys to actually do the data labeling, okay? So here's the data labeling and machine learning, right? You prepare and label the data, right? So in this use case, we're doing the object detection, right? We're actually labeling where the dog is at. We're going to tell the machine, in this picture, here is the dog, right? Somebody has to do this job, right? So then once you have that data label saying, in all of these million pictures, or however many pictures, there's the dogs in here, in there, and this and that. So the machine can see that and learn that pattern, and then it'll be able to do future reference or inference, right? So that if you're gonna doing autonomous driving, these cameras are gonna take picture of the streets and they can actually identify humans and cars and those type of things, objects, right? So this is very typical of object detection. So labeling data is very important. Labeling your data correctly is also very important. We're gonna talk about that a little bit later as well. So once you have your data labeled, you feed into the machine learning platforms such as SageMaker, right? You use image classification, using convolutional neural network behind the scenes to actually train the machine to actually build a model that will be able to recognize the dog that you have labeled here, right? So then once you have that model trained, you can actually start doing the inferencing. So you can feed some of the images and say, hey, is there a dog in here? Detect that dog and then label it and tell me where it is, right? Very simple problem, but without labeling data, you will not be able to get that at all. Machine will never see that dog, right? So data labeling is hard, as I mentioned before. I feel my heart goes out to those guys who had to actually do the labeling themselves. You guys are going to be labeling today, so you will see how it is. You're going to label 100 images. It's going to be fun, but it's going to be tedious. So it's going to be fun, though. So labeling is hard, right? Especially when you're labeling a large data set. Say, for example, if you want to have some really accurate. Today, you're only going to do 100 images, so the performance is going to be pretty bad, but good enough just for the lab, so you can get a gist of it. typically for image classification, you probably want to have at least 1,000 to 10,000 images, right? Try to label that will take you hours, if not days, right? So, and also requires human because you have to train the machine, right? You have to tell the machine where the dogs are at or whether this is a dog image or not, whether there's a dog in the image or not. So it requires a lot of human labor to actually label that data. And then it becomes time-consuming, costly. A lot of times, the customer don't even have that time or resources to actually just sit there and just going through each one of these images or whatever the data sets that you have. Sometimes they might, if you don't have images, for example, just regular data sets, people will have to go through all of these data sets and do different type of labeling depending on what your requirements are, right? So very difficult to achieve high accuracy of labels as well. If you just bring some people who don't understand how to actually label it correctly, because somebody might, their interpretation of the data set might be different than the others. So they may label it one way, and then somebody else label it a different way. Ground truth is going to try to handle all of that for you, okay? So Amazon SageMaker, do you guys know what the SageMaker is? So Amazon SageMaker is basically a platform that we offer. It's a managed platform that offered by AWS for you to build, train, and deploy machine learning, okay? So you can pre-build your notebooks, which you guys are going to be using today. Excuse me. And then you can have your built-in, we have built-in high-performance algorithm, which you'll be using today for image classification. And then optimization, all of those things are all part of the machine learning, all part of the, not just for data science just to experiment, but also to be able to actually productionalize that model, right? So it's a complete end-to-end platform. And ground truth is part of it, right? As I mentioned before, you can't really use the SageMaker to train anything until you have some data to train for. Right? So this is ground truth. It's ground zero for you. So as you're labeling data set tasks, you see that this is some of the ones that that are built in, offered by AWS. One of them is bounding boxes. That is basically object detection in an image. And as well as image classification, whether you look at the image as a whole, you don't actually bound the boxes around specific objects within the image, right? And also segmentation. This is actually really interesting. This here can give very accurate the segmentation where you actually instead of actually where you draw a bounding box, right? You actually pick using the pixels to find the exact object that you wanted to label out, right? So as you can see here, this person here is completely labeled just in a different color, where in here, there's actually some backgrounds here that are actually being inside of that bounding box, right? So it's actually the accuracy is much higher. Does that make sense? Can we, until the end, thank you. Hold the question until the end. Sorry, guys, we're on Twitch, so we just want to make sure that we finish the presentation first, okay? And then text classification is very easy. So this one is actually a sentiment analysis, right? So if you have a lot of text, a lot of unstructured text that you want to extract meaning out of it, so this is one way to do it as well. So you look at the different tweet or feeds that are coming in, then you can have a labeler to label whether this is good or bad, right? And then custom tasks. Custom tasks are basically you build for your specific use case, right? So we have 4 of these built-in tasks that you can use, but there are other use cases that these 4 use cases that may not fit into it, so you can actually build a custom ones yourself, okay? So one of the really cool thing about ground truth is that it has machine learning built in itself, okay? So how does that work? Now, for example, today you're not actually going to do it today because the data set is just too small. I think ground truth activate the auto labeling itself based on the data that you label when the data set is more than 5,000 records, I think, or something like that. So again, like I said, labeling data is tedious, right? So for example, if you have a data set that has like millions of images or millions of records, what ground truth can do for you is that you would label maybe the first 100 of it, okay? The ground truth will actually learn what you have labeled and try to infer it right away and tell you that, okay, this is what I label, are these correct? And if they're not correct, you can label more data, and ground truth itself will become more accurate as it goes. Does that make sense? So you don't actually have to label the whole 1 million data sets. Can we leave the question till the end? I'm sorry? Ground truth. Can you define ground truth? Can I do that? Or do we just leave it until the end? OK. So ground truth basically is a data labeling service that we offer from SageMaker. OK? All right. So auto labeling, that's what the ground truth can do for you, right? So you don't have to say, if you have a million records or a million images in your data sets, you don't have to label the entire 1 million. You can use ground truth to automatically label that for you. And there's a confidence level that you can set and say, OK, this looks good. I can have the ground truth to label the rest of them for you, right? So that's what's really cool about ground truth. So as you can see here, it goes through the auto labeling based on the label data that you have provided, and then the human labeling here, and then they'll keep learning to say, OK, this might look like a dog to me. I'm going to label it as dog, and then you guys can verify whether that actually is or not. So it continuously learning that so that you don't have to label the entire 1 million data set. Now, so the ground truth can do some of the auto labeling for you already, but you might still have to label maybe 50,000 out of the 1 million data sets, right? It still is a daunting task, right? We realize that the customer don't have a whole lot of resources that be able to actually label this data, right? And you don't really need a whole lot of, the data scientists, they're very expensive to get, right? You don't need a data scientist to actually label these data. And a lot of times that you don't have the resource for it. So what you could do is that you can actually create a human workforce, which you guys are going to do today. And you guys are going to build a private human workforce, just yourself, though. Right? So you can create a private workforce. What the concept behind that is that if you, say, for example, you are working on some data sets that you don't want anybody outside of your organization or your team to actually see that data, you can create a private workforce that just to invite the people that you trust. And they can label that data with you together. Right? So maybe a weekend job or something, you can have somebody to help you to label that data. Now the public one, this one is really cool. This one is 24/7. Do you guys know Mechanical Turk, Amazon Mechanical Turk? So Amazon Mechanical Turk is basically a public workforce. They're kind of the people that work from home, and then they will take the job as they see fit. Typically, people just working from home trying to get some extra cash, right? So this is 24/7, over 500,000 independent workers ready at your fingertips. So you can actually create a public workforce. The lab doesn't do it today because there's just not enough time for you guys to run through that lab. But there's a link under that lab today that you can actually run to use the public workforce to do the exactly same thing that you guys are trying to do with that data set. Okay? It takes a few hours because it takes some real human to actually join your workforce to actually do that. And it'll cost you money as well, right? Because you're actually paying them to actually label your data. You can have vendors as well. Maybe you're a partner with some vendors, your system integrators, some of those guys. You can create a workforce for them, and then they can label your data as well, right? So first step is that you guys are not going to use the console today. Mostly it's in code, but you can just run through that in a notebook. But this is what it would look like if you were actually creating a labeling job in the console itself. So what you do here is that you create a labeling job, and then you provide the details for the job. So for example, what kind of task type that we kind of talked about earlier, right? Are you doing a object detection, or are you doing an image classification, which you guys will be doing later today, or some custom ones if you wanted to, okay? And then the labeling job is now running. So you see your tasks, how many records are being actually labeled. You can see the actual the progress, right? So in here, this is what your human labeler is going to see. This is what you guys are going to see later. You'll see that. So this is you give on the left. On your left pane, you basically tell them that what is a good label, what is a bad label, right? So that hopefully your human labeler will pay attention to this and actually label that correctly. So this is a way for you to tell the human labeler to say, okay, I want you to do it this way, please don't do it the other way. The other way, then that's just bad data, okay? And another thing that ground truth will do is that it will, I think it's actually later in the slides, I'm not going to talk about it now. So you can actually view the labels in the console itself. You can actually see that this image here, here's the dog, there's the dog, and stuff like that, which you guys can see later. Then you'll see who actually labeled it. Sometimes it could be the ground truth actually labeling it, confidence score. So going back to the science behind it, I kind of mentioned about it already. You're human labeling it first. Majority voting, this is what I want to talk about. So say, for example, that you have a workforce, and what's going to happen is that for each label data, it needs to take a majority voting here, okay? So these are 4 different human workers that are actually labeling these. As you can see here, this actually is Shar-Pei, right? That's a Shar-Pei dog, right? Okay, I don't know dogs that much, but I definitely know it's not a bulldog, that's for sure. So as you can see here, there's 3 people here that are labeling as a bulldog. But what's going to happen, so we do a correct, the probability of the correct label behind the scenes. So what we do is that this person who labeled Shar-Pei, he or she is correct most of the time. So we're going to trust him or her more than the rest of the 3. So we do a calculation of this probability of this correct label. So in the end, we're actually going to say that it's a Shar-Pei of 90%. All right, so there's a lot of science behind it. That's why ground truth will help you a lot labeling the data. Okay? And not only automatically label the data, but I also do a lot of machine learning behind the scenes to calculate a possibility of how good your human labeler individual are, and they will trust one more than the other. Does that make sense? All right. So then the active labeling is coming in. Now again, like I said, today you won't be able to do this. It won't activate that because it's just not enough data. If you have a really large data set, it can start learning it based on the labels that you already created, okay? So it does the auto labeling. It feeds back to the label data set. You verify if that data set is good enough or not. So just to give you an example, okay, we experimented with the image classification. As you can see here, so this is Mechanical Turk. As you can see, as it scales, obviously there's no way human can scale better than machines, right? So you can see ground truth just kind of took off when there's a 12,000 of data annotated, how fast it could do. And as far as accuracy and also the cost, you can see that ground truth actually is a lot lower, if I can find it. Because the computer, obviously, is cheaper than a human resource, even with the public data source. So that's the total cost right there. Accuracy, still doing very well. Okay, you did not lose the accuracy with the auto labeling compared to the humans. All right? And then also this is the runtime inference, that how fast the annotate the image is. And as you can see, ground truth is up top, is going up top as well. And the validation error, which I'm not going to talk too much into. So for example, another example is that you can see the blue line is it's actually the auto labeling, and then the orange line is human, very close. You can actually see that sometimes the ground truth auto labeling performs a little bit better than the human labeling. You can see this one here. Some human actually went way down here, right, where the ground truth actually closed it up a little bit closer to the toe of the bird's toe. Another example, you can see this one here, very close, right? So if you see the detections here for that, ground truth still outperforms most of the the mechanical Turks or the human labelings. Okay. All right. That's all I have. It's lab time now. I don't have a whole lot because the lab actually takes a while for you to complete, because you guys have to actually manually label those the images. It's going to be fun though. You guys are going to like it.